The NHL trade deadline has passed us by, and it actually might have been one of the best deadlines of all time, or at the very least of recent times. Mikko Rantanen settled for 9 figures in a return to the Central. Brad Marchand completed his anamorph into full rat, moving to the Florida Panthers. The Sabres finally traded Dylan Cousins, but it was Brady Tkachuk who was crying. And the Leafs, well, they got their truculence. We'll discuss all of the winners, losers, and everyone in between from the NHL trade deadline.
Truculence, eh?
Yeah, you got to use that word.
Anamorph, truculence. This guy's
I
going
was in
hard.
this bag for the intro.
Cooking.
I can't even speak. The thesaurus on this guy.
This guy got swatted and taken down by that word.
Unmatched.
But we got there. Thank you. Welcome back to another podcast on deadline day. We've done things a little bit differently this time around. We want to just wrap up everything in case you're like, I don't want to waste 12 hours of my life watching some live stream of these jamokes in some room that does look beautiful because it's sponsored by Crown Royal.
Yeah, it is.
Has a new display panel, all that. But you know what? We're just here to give you the facts of everything that happened, all the things that actually mattered from the entire trade deadline. We're going to do it in the form of winners and losers. As I said, everything in between. It's only one team or so that we have in that last category. We got plenty of winners. We certainly have a few losers. But let's start with those winners. It is the Mikko Rantanen trade that is leading that, and it's hard not to leave this deadline, Thomas, thinking that the Dallas Stars are the best team in the NHL.
Can you imagine telling a Dallas Stars fan 2 months ago that you'd have Mikko Rantanen after the trade deadline? Literally a conference, a division rival, and you're just taking one of their best players, and you're already a cup contender. Sorry, Luca.
Okay.
But your green hat makes me feel like you're kind of rooting for the Stars in some way.
I'm definitely not. But
Okay. You look at what this team has now. You look at what their future has to offer. Also, logging up Wyatt Johnson to what may be one of the best contracts in the NHL already, like $8 million for a player of his caliber that can put up so much production. But then you look at their line chart and you see that he's slated as like their third line center. Yeah. This is your new Stanley Cup favorite. It just feels like it. And I'm sure Rantanen, now that he knows that there's more peace of mind. There's no flurry of, I've arrived in Carolina. What happened? I've been stunned with the trade. And now it's like, oh, I just got to perform there. But in the back of my mind, I know that come July 1st, I'm going to be a free agent. Mm-hmm. You now know that I'm here for the next 8 years. And I'm hopefully going to win a couple Stanley Cups in that time. And he has a team to do it now. He has a team to do it 5 years from now. Yeah. And I just feel like the Dallas Stars are positioned to dominate.
Luca, we're going to talk about the Avs a little bit later on. I only want one answer out of you here. Are you like a little upset that by the end, the 12, over 8, that was pretty similar, no, to what was being reported? Like, it really could have happened, and he still could have been an Av, as much as you like Natchez.
Potentially. I mean, the more I think about it, the more I'm just like, in a vacuum, I understand why it's easy to be upset, but you have to just look at it from the separate move. Like, when the Avs made the deal originally, I never thought in my wildest dreams that the Hurricanes were going to then turn around and trade him again because they couldn't get a deal done with him. Like, I thought that the risk the Hurricanes were taking in the first place was that even if he didn't sign, it was a worthwhile risk to take because he's one of the 15 best players in hockey and he can help you on a Stanley Cup run on an already loaded team. So it is, like, I can understand why Avs fans might feel a little slighted or upset by it. But you make that deal 20 times out of 20 if you don't think Rantanen's signing with you. And that's what it was at the time. It was him saying, hey, like, we're not getting any progress on this. So from the Avalanche perspective, you get what you get. And then from there, you move on. I really think that's how you have to approach this because there's no way to have predicted that this would be the outcome.
All right, well, we'll get back to the Hurricanes and we'll get back to the Avs, but we're now going to go on to the Florida Panthers and the Bruins here, mixed into one, because they shocked us. They hit us right over the head pretty much at the end of deadline day. We knew Brad Marchand was going to move, and no one was really saying Florida. Maybe that was just because out of our imaginations, we were placing him in other spots, but the Panthers, they want to go back-to-back. They got Seth Jones and they got Brad Marchand at the end of this trade deadline when everything was all said and done. Luca. That's winners. Like they're on the podium for this.
They have to be, right? You get the ultimate pest rat. You mentioned it off the top in your intro, and I mean, everyone's probably clamoring now for just the Kachuk, Marchand, Sam Bennett line that they could
after that Four Nations too.
Yeah.
Like,
after that
now
Four
they're all
Nations too,
teammates.
and
Like,
then even to add in, like he makes his return to Boston Tuesday of this coming week. Like that is just insane timing for all of this. He is still playing at an incredibly high level, and in Florida, he doesn't have to be the guy alongside David Pastrnak. Like in Boston, it was Pasta, and Marchand had to still be that point producer. He's getting up there in age for sure, even though he's still playing at a high level. It's a lot of weight for him in that specific role. In Florida, he doesn't have to be that. He's a nice complementary piece that can provide so much for your lineup. Leadership, hitting, drawing penalties, just being an overall pest, but also
rat-like tendencies,
but then the high-level skill that he has still at this age is just Florida is man, I'm so excited to see what this looks like. I can envision what it looks like. He is going to have such a warm reception, I think, to that crowd. That crowd is going to fall in love with him instantly. It's hard not to.
We're going to be really spoiled with the first round matchups now because of these two winners.
Oh my God,
the
Atlantic
whoever
and
the
Central?
Stars and the Panthers are
it's
going to be
gonna be
playing.
crazy.
It's going to be crazy.
And if that is the Stanley Cup final, Florida-Dallas final, it does not sound like, from a market standpoint, the greatest thing in the world. I would be
I'd be all
so
in.
excited to watch
I mean, the
that.
NHL would love that.
And I think from the whole Marchand standpoint, this feels like, for me anyways, it happened so quickly. And I'm sure it's a tough day for Marchand, leaving Boston. You're the captain. You've been there for so long. You're a franchise legend. I'm sure he's going through a lot of different emotions right now. But once he realizes the opportunity that he has in Florida, how excited he's going to be to compete for another Stanley Cup at this stage of his career, it's going to be special to watch. So, I mean, they went out, they got Tarasenko and Okposo last year. What they did this year just trumps that tenfold.
Now, the Bruins in this, they did get some assets for, they moved out. Not everyone was just assuming that the rebuild was going to happen on this trade deadline specifically, especially at the start of the year. Like if you had told Bruins fans that by trade deadline you'd be getting rid of Brad Marchand and sending him to the Panthers and Brandon Carlo and Charlie Coyle, you'd be like, what happened to our season? But at the same time, I mean, when it's time to move on, it's time to move on, and they didn't do too bad in those trades.
No, they really didn't. And I think like the hardest thing, I think, as a GM is to accept what you are as a team. And especially like a team like the Bruins, you could hold on to past success and being known as like a wheeling and dealing team at the deadline to try and like load up one last run with Brad Marchand and Pasta. I just saw a tweet that like they haven't had a lineup that hasn't featured Chara, Bergeron, or Marchand since 2002. Like this truly
2002?
is signaling like an end of,
I mean, Chara's carrying a lot of the head.
100%.
I know. Well,
Bergeron too.
Oh,
But-
sorry, you said Bergeron. Okay, yeah.
But still,
It's still
like
crazy.
It's crazy to think about. So I think that kind of stuff makes it even harder. Like it's not a decision that is easy to make to trade your captain like that, but to get Fraser Minton, who I think I'm really high on, probably a lot higher than other people as a prospect from the Leafs in that Brandon Carlo trade. I think maybe people would have rather had Easton Cowan or Danford come back, but I think Minton's going to be a really good two-way player. But then you get a first-round pick for him. You get Casey Middlestat, who struggled in Colorado, but for Charlie Coyle, who's a lot older and still has term, you kind of swap him out with a guy that's younger, has skill. We've seen him thrive in certain situations. And you get a second-round pick from the Avs and a prospect from them, too. You did what you had to do to start a rebuild, and that is really difficult. But you're a winner because you made the hard decision to do that. If you decided to do nothing, that would have been maybe the worst thing you could have done for your franchise.
Doing what they did today avoids the pitfall of falling into this like vacuum of mediocrity for 4 years, and maybe they helped accelerate the clock on the rebuild today as opposed to like just being whatever for the next couple of years and then deciding we got to rebuild.
Looking down the camera directly at the Islanders.
I just finished telling you how I love playoff hockey unless the Islanders are playing in the first round.
Sorry, Islander. That was rude. That was really rude. But
Hey, you kept Kyle Palmieri. I'm sure he'll be great for you.
now, as you said, the Bruins, they made some great moves, and it's really funny to say that because they kept it all in the division for the most part. Like,
yeah, that's the crazy part of this all for sure, is that they just bolstered their rivals.
Yeah, exactly, but they're not involved, so it doesn't even matter. Whatever, you guys can go, smack each other, and I had nothing to do with that this year. Anyways, the Leafs, they will have something to do with that. Yeah. And Luca, you consider them winners today?
Yeah, I mean, hard not to when you acquire Scott Laughton and Brandon Carlo. I think you mentioned it. Truculence, is that the word you used?
Yeah, I just said it jokingly. I mean, it's true, but I mean, like, that's clearly what they're going for,
They are.
Jam.
They've got a type.
There's some jam, boys.
They've got a type. And I think that there's two ways of looking at it. You could say, hey, like, little much to give up. All in all, like, you've gotten rid of 2 first-round picks and 2 pretty solid young players that a lot of people were excited about in Gurbankin and Fraser Minton. But at the same time, like, Scott Laughton is now under contract next year for half the salary because you got Philly to retain. And Brandon Carlo is under contract for a little while longer as well, which is a really nice piece for a guy that is a stay-at-home defenseman. He's going to block a lot of shots, kind of in the mold of that Brandon Tanev, but he also doesn't have to be the number 1 defenseman on the team, which I think is going to help you situationally in the playoffs, deploy him in certain roles. And the same thing goes with Scott Laughton.
And the timeline is now.
The timeline is
like
now.
We said it.
That's the most important.
That is the nature of all North American sports that have salary caps and draft picks and whatever. Eventually, your chips are on the table and you're going for it now, and you sacrifice some of your future. Like the fact that it's a pick from like 2 years from now,
for sure,
as well. Like,
and you managed to keep Easton Cowan and Ben Danford. Like, I think if you're a Leafs fan, you're feeling pretty good about this because these aren't just 1-year rentals either for what you gave up.
You would not be excited to see what the Panthers did in this deadline, but you would be excited to the Leafs you've countered it by doing something else.
For sure.
And you've countered it in a way too where I know the game's not played on paper, but looking at a top 4 of, okay, you got Riley like and then Tanev, McCabe. That just looks like a decor. I can't believe I'm saying this.
He was like slumping into his chair. There were no cameras on him. He's just like, oh man.
Well, because Brandon Carlo is someone who's like, I've watched him in the playoffs shut down opposing teams' forwards. Like, I know the past couple of years, maybe he hasn't continued the trajectory of when he started his career, but like he's been a really good player in the NHL. He's only 27. He's 6'5", 220 plus pounds. Yeah. Like, that's a guy that you want to have on your team in a 7-game series, and it's going to make it difficult when you get into a slugfest against the Panthers or against the Lightning or whoever you play in the loaded Eastern Conference.
And you play Oliver Ekman-Larsson less now as a result of it. You play Benoit less as a result of adding a legitimate top 4 defenseman, which matchup-wise, you'll take that every dime.
All of these first-round matchups in the East are going to be exceptional to watch. But I do think a Battle of Ontario, that's the one a lot of us here, we're circling. We are praying that it's going to happen. And if it does happen, the Ottawa Senators, they've charged up for it. If they can get there, if they can continue this wild card run. And from what they did during the deadline, as much as it kind of, puts me in a state of not knowing how I feel, good for the Senators. And that was Luca. You think they're winners today?
Yeah. So on the live stream, I think we were kind of like going back and forth on the Cousins for Norris thing and not really sure how to feel about it in the moment.
It's almost like for like. It's a weird one. Not in the sense that like Norris might be the best player, but it comes with some wrinkles.
So I think I've kind of gone the other way now, where I'm kind of all in on the Cousins fit, and it's mainly because I'm seeing just how much the Sens have struggled scoring at 5-on-5 this year and how productive Cousins has been, even though it hasn't been the most productive season for him. He still has over 25-on-5 points. And then getting Fabian Zetterlund, too, from the San Jose Sharks to add to your top 9. He's got over 25-on-5 points as well this season for the Sharks. So both guys coming from teams that have not been successful this year, you get injected into a lineup that is playing important games. They've contributed at 5-on-5, which I think the Senators need, so filling big holes. And then I also think the built-in chemistry between Cousins and Drake Batherson, played at the 2022 World Championships together and seemingly became really good friends because of it. There's been a lot of kind of that on social media of how they're best buddies now and playing together. Maybe you don't have those chemistry issues immediately.
Well, you want to talk about best buddies, and I don't know if I'm quite ready to crown the Sens as winners. I I understand. I think there's high upside with the moves they've made, but I do think of all the teams we've talked about, there's the most risk with what Ottawa's doing because they removed talent from their team today to take a chance on some new players like Dylan Cousins. And in the spirit of best buddies, when your captain, Brady Tkachuk, is moved to tears when talking about Josh Norris, who's now no longer part of the team, that, I'm not saying it worries me, but I do think there's a chance that Dylan Cousins is coming from Buffalo and you're immediately game one playing the best hockey, most high stakes hockey you've ever played in the NHL because you're in a playoff race with the Senators. There's zero room for error.
We were in a playoff race too. You mean if they make the playoffs? Because we only missed the playoffs by 1 point. He's been involved in that scenario before. I'm gonna stick up for Cousins a bit here, and I had a lot of criticism for him. I do think, and maybe this is just me being a crazy optimist, I have a feeling this might be a little bit more like that Middlestad-Byram trade, which I know in the end didn't quite work out for you. Maybe you wouldn't have redone that.
Brutal.
But there were moments where it kind of did work out.
Yep.
I think Cousins might find better time and better game there. He just needed a clear head, a totally new scenario for himself, a little bit less pressure. And then Norris, it really is just like a health thing, more or less.
Yeah.
I think this might just be a 1-for-1 hockey trade when things are, all said and done. That's my thought and my hope as well, because I think Cousins can be a great player. There's a reason he earned that contract. It's just he hasn't been the same guy, and I know a lot of people say after, unfortunately, when he got, concussed after that fight.
Yeah.
It was pretty nuts, like, to see how much he dropped off. But he's played in meaningful
He's
playoff
played in
hunt games.
Okay,
Come on, at least give us
And
that.
that World
Not
Championship
for-
run, that World Championship run for Canada, he was arguably their best goal scorer.
He was.
So-
all I'm saying is like there's just this immediate shift in urgency, and there's little room for like adjustment phase with this trade.
Sometimes
why
that's
there's
good,
more.
though.
It
You know
could be.
what?
Listen, I'm
Entering
very high on Dylan
environment- yeah.
Cousins.
Oh.
I wanted the Habs to try and get him.
Yeah.
I know.
I wanted
really
the
didn't
Avs
make
to try and
sense.
get him. I wish
Winners,
they would.
Sabres. We kept JJ Paterka and all the other people that you guys had your eyes on.
Alex
I'm
Tuck.
adding that
Alex
in there.
Tuck, man.
Yeah, before we move on to losers.
Winners, Connor
Would've-
Bedard.
would've been
Still playing
these-
with Ryan Donato.
Yeah. Your number
There's
one.
like no points in his last 7 games, Bedard.
My number one trade.
Yeah, that was
by Donato.
number one on Thomas's
Stays put.
trade bait board.
Not only does he stay put, but he hasn't signed an extension either. So he's going to be a free agent when July 1st
Maybe.
hits.
We'll see. That might be the ones.
Great job, Chicago.
Before we move on to losers, if you're enjoying watching these losers talking about this,
Oh wow!
go ahead,
Jesus.
like the video, helps us out, subscribe to the channel, all that fun stuff. Luca was tempted to give me the finger and did give me the finger. I said us as losers.
You kind of you said
No, you said
these and then you
these
pointed out.
No, I said these.
It's fine.
I have a
No,
left
it wasn't
arm
the
that's
royal these. It was the royal.
Very
then let me
unprofessional.
state I am the loser. And
Very,
you two
very
with me.
unprofessional.
All right.
Very
very
unprofessional.
unprofessional.
Very.
Very. Speaking of unprofessional, I don't know what unprofessional. Is. Take that back.
Malpractice.
Speaking
No,
of
far too strong a word here, but the Carolina Hurricanes. This is a really, really weird one to rack your brain against because
Yeah.
Hurricanes fans, let me speak to you a little bit directly here because I want to say I don't quite agree with them being in losers here. I'm going to say this, and Thomas, he's going to have the floor after this. It's a weird one because at the end of the day, and we'll show it on the screen, yes, they went from being contenders to whatever they are now and not necessarily being stronger on paper right now. But the asset overhaul and trade, like, they didn't make out poorly in this. It's just you don't look great optics and you don't look great locker room, perhaps, because you definitely went from being like, ooh, all-in contenders to we're going to backpedal a little bit.
The actual moves that they made, if they just traded HS for all of what they got, okay, fine.
Mm-hmm.
You did well on return on what you had to give up. If this happened in Toronto,
Don't know.
if the Leafs,
I'm not hearing
if
that.
the playoff pushing Leafs
Dumb.
traded
Dumb.
a big asset and just got worse, there would be riots right now.
I don't care. They're not that, though.
Listen, my point is,
that's all the more reason why this is even more of a malpractice.
No,
and
it isn't. Like,
I
you're
was
comparing to that.
fuming during our live stream about Carolina.
That
So
Roy
I'm not-
Williams
I'm not gonna
Arena,
try to repeat
watching
myself.
more of the North Carolina Tar Heels. Like, they're not the number one story there. They don't have as much attention. So I'm not including that as
Okay.
like some part of the context.
Fine. I won't bring the Leafs into it. My point is, though, you entering the season, the expectation is that you were supposed to compete for a Stanley Cup. If I told you in September that somehow you got worse at the deadline without any injuries and you willingly position your team in a worse scenario. I know it's more complicated than that, but when you traded for Mikko Rantanen, that's the gamble. Go all in. Take this guy for the playoffs. Try to compete with the best of the best. Like, if I'm a player on this team and I see what management did, I'm really feeling disappointed that I didn't at least get the opportunity to go to battle and to compete for a Stanley Cup at full strength. And instead, now we got draft picks in 2026 and 2027 and Logan Stankoven, who could be a very, very good player, but he's 20 years old. It just seems a little unfair to what should be a team competing for a Stanley Cup. That's all.
I hear what you're saying from a sports fan perspective and firmly agree with that. That's very exciting to think, but I also understand it from an organizational perspective of where you're a market and team like the Hurricanes, where I really can't just take necessarily those types of risks if I also have the option of still being really good just now and for the next little while so that I can maintain what I have. I don't know. That's at least me trying to be like, if I was a Hurricanes fan, I wouldn't be furious, but I would also maybe be disappointed a little bit for sure.
I think that they would still be good even if they went this season with Rantanen and he left. Like, they'd still be a good team next year and still have financial flexibility to do what they wanted to do, add someone, whatever, because they are a savvy team that manages to make these moves. Like the Jake Gensel move last year before the playoffs. I guess that was deadline, right?
Yeah.
Jake Gensel. And he walked, and it happens. The kind of life goes on. I think Stankoven really fits in with how they play hockey. Like, he's kind of a Seth Jarvis clone. He's tenacious on the puck, obviously like a smaller player, but great stick, like very active player, fast, skilled, just a hound out there, honestly, with a ton of skill that I think he'll endear himself to the fans there very quickly and be a key contributor very quickly. I think the disappointment comes from this deadline specifically, where you get those 2 first-round picks back, and the trade officially hasn't processed yet. So, like, I guess that's part of it, where they couldn't use those 2 first-round picks that they got to maybe make an upgrade in the moment. But I kind of just look at it and I'm like, your team is worse now, and what move can you make in the future to make your team better than it may have been with Mikko Rantanen here for a cup run? I don't know what that is, so it's going to kind of be a remain to be seen.
The what if would make me feel not so great as a Hurricanes fan, is all I'll say for sure. But they are comfortably in that second position. They're not in some kind of wild card battle, so they'll be in a decent spot in that way. But speaking of wild card teams, we kind of have them as a whole in the losers here, because the big teams, oh man, they swung. Like the teams that were already good, they swung, which probably made things really hard for anyone on the bubble to even really do any of their moves today, and certainly be that hopeful if they were to make a playoff run.
Yeah, like I guess wildcard teams we're talking about specifically are like Detroit, Columbus, Minnesota is kind of in that wild card, third in the central spot, and then even LA is that third in the Pacific spot. Those are the 4 teams that I'd identify.
I don't think it's fair to group Calgary into this. Just
No, I don't
kind of feel like we're all like pretty impressed with what Calgary's done this year, and you're ahead of schedule.
100%.
So it's just like, just stay put. It's fine.
And I feel like Montreal is also in that category, where it's like you don't need to push your chips all in right this moment. I think Ottawa did have to, because of just the contracts that they've got and where they are right now. Like I think where they are as a franchise, they want to make the playoffs this year, so it makes a lot of sense. But I think they're losers in the sense that, like, it's not that I wish they would have made moves. It's just unfortunate that every team ahead of them and the big guns just were like, all right, someone's loading up, our turn now. Yeah. And really didn't leave anyone else feeling like they should go all in. And that's why it's kind of a loser scenario, where it's like, they're not losers for not doing anything. You just feel like as a fan, you're losing out, because how are you supposed to compete with these other teams?
I would have felt absolutely sick if the Sabres were somehow still in this, wasting their time. I'm so happy.
Yeah.
That they're just like, we're focused on next year in the draft.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Completely agree.
Thank you for that 13-game losing streak.
I think, if anything, though, the Wild and Kings fans are the ones that probably should feel a little worse as losers than Detroit and Columbus, because they seem to have teams that are consistently in the playoffs. And Nyquist for Minnesota, Kuzmenko for LA. I don't think those are needle-moving moves that are going to help you in a playoff series.
The Kings were the one who are like, we're tired of seeing the Oilers and we need something to help us, and people around us got some serious weapons that were available.
Yep.
Now, as you've noticed, probably by the decibels of this video, Jesse is not here. He is in Italy, yelling in the streets as the Central Division got just a bit better, even though the Jets did make some moves. He did not include the Winnipeg Jets in those. Here's what he had to say.
Guys, I'm literally in the middle of the street right now in Turin, Italy. Left my dinner to give a little update on trade deadline day. Look, I actually think that the Jets did a good job at addressing some areas of their team. I think Luke Schenn will be a good depth defenseman for the playoffs, and I think a guy like Brandon Tanev, who's familiar with the organization, you want a guy like that on your team in the playoffs. Plays hard, versatile. But I will say this. If you look at the Jets relative to the other teams in our division, it's tough to come away from today feeling great. And I don't blame the Jets. It's not the Jets' fault that these other teams were able to pull off these incredible deals. I think there's a lot of factors that you need to take into account. Do players want to go to Winnipeg? Would they prefer to go to other more desirable places like Rantanen going to Dallas, signs a deal there, not going to have to pay income tax, all this stuff. But you look at Colorado right now, you look at Dallas, they just stocked up. I mean, the Central Division is going to be an absolute nightmare in the playoffs. And also, how about the Atlantic Division? Those were some heavy-duty moves that we saw. Marchand to the Panthers? Crazy. Brandon Carlo to the Leafs, thought that was a great move. But for the Jets, guys, it's time to see what the Jets are made of. Like, if we go to the playoffs and we're out in the first round, it's going to be really frustrating because you're going to have this feeling like we should have done more at the deadline. But there's a lot of things that happen behind closed doors. We don't know the details of everything, but I'm telling you, like, it's going to be tough to beat Dallas, and it's going to be tough to beat Colorado. But I believe in this squad. Go Jets, go, baby. This is our time. Let's go! Let's go, Turin!
Do you think that northern Italian man on a smoke break behind him was like, who is this man yelling about income tax and animals in the middle of the street? Panthers?
I think he could have done a bit of a better Italian accent on the "Let's go" at the end. Like, I feel like if he
How do you say that?
Like
How do you say "let's go" in Italian?
Forza.
Yeah, forza. Andiamo. Andiamo. Dice like,
Andiamo is like the literal,
Jets.
but like if you're cheering for someone, you just say like Forza Italia.
Forza Winnipeg.
Forza Winnipeg. Forza Colorado.
Anyways, our very last team to discuss here. This was the one in between that we were kind of discussing. I kind of wanted them in the winners. Luca would kind of want them in the losers, so that's why they ended up in between.
Am I breaking the tie over here?
You could break the tie if you'd like. That was the Avalanche because they made a lot of moves, but a lot of people made moves around them. But I guess the point I was kind of pointing towards was the Rantanen thing, which you already did make a point on, which it's a tough one to judge, but it hurts a bit that he's now in your division again for the same amount of money that you'd potentially offered. But it wasn't about that for you, of why you're confused.
No. And like the Nelson trade, I get in a vacuum. Like, again, you got the best trade deadline target outside of Mikko Rantanen that was available. So, like, kudos to you. It cost quite a bit. I'm looking at this more from like a future perspective of like, okay, this cup window is open, but you've kind of locked yourself into this team a little bit in the next few years. And again, like GMs are savvy and smart and they can make moves, but Charlie Coyle, getting him didn't really make a lot of sense to me, especially giving up a second round pick to do it. The Avs don't have a first, second, or third round pick in the next two drafts. So like your draft capital come deadline time next year is completely gone. Draft capital coming into the draft in the summer is completely gone, so you can't really restock your cupboard. And you look at the guys that are hoping to be on expiring contracts. Like next year, you've got $8 million in cap space for Jonathan Drouin and Brock Nelson, who you just gave up a boatload for. So I'm assuming you want to try and re-sign him and bring him back. I don't know if you'll be able to bring him and Drouin back with the amount of cap space you have. Josh Manson expires the year after. So does Charlie Coyle. So does Ross Colton. So does Miles Wood. Like, there's all these fringe guys that I wish their contracts were expiring a little sooner, and it just didn't make sense to me to add Coyle to the mix, give up a prospect, a draft pick, and Middlestat, who's younger, a better player, and maybe you could have got something a little more inspiring than Coyle. But I that's my kind of case for it, where it just seems like they're paying a bit of a premium for these players now that I'm kind of just like, they don't really fit in the puzzle for me.
I actually think, like, we talked about this earlier when I was kind of picking your brain on the whole Middlestat situation. I'm like, why hasn't this worked? Why do they want to move him? Mm-hmm. And I actually think for what the team needs, Coyle offers you more and probably fits that third line center role more than what Middlestat gives you.
I don't disagree with that.
I don't love what they had to give up for him. And I think we're all kind of just sour on the fact that they gave up Byram for Middlestat. And that's kind of clouding our view of this trade.
Yeah.
Because it's like,
that's part of it.
If you just didn't do that, and at the time it was kind of like this nice fresh start for both guys, but it just didn't work out for one of them, and that's just the harsh truth of it. I like the Nelson trade.
I do too.
They gave up a lot. To me, they just have to be in the sort of loser category because, and this is completely out of their control, it's just because they could be facing Mikko Rantanen somehow in the first round of the playoffs.
It's a hard thought to move past, but guys, this might have been, again, the best deadline day, at least ever, that we've worked here. In years past, that Shea Weber to Utah trade, we would have had...
Hall of Famers traded on deadline day?
We would have had to fake at least 2 to 3 minutes of conversation on that. Not talking about it.
Not talking
Don't
about
care.
I'll probably get a jersey, though.
Which one? Logo might change. Who knows? But either way, we thank you for joining us again on Deadline Day. Luca, he wants to stop me as always because he's got more.
Well, we got to do That Deserves a Crown because this is the BarDown Podcast presented by Crown Royal.
By Crown Royal.
I'm giving it to Jack Roslovic, okay?
Whoa!
Guy gets his number back because Mikko Rantanen's gone, and he got a Rolex from Mikko for trading numbers for him for 13 games. So
Rolly on the wrist, number still on the back.
Jack Roslovic, buddy, you deserve a crown.
I'm giving it to everyone who bought a Carolina Hurricanes Mikko Rantanen jersey. You deserve more than a crown.
No, that was a risk. If you did that, that's on your own. You risked it. You that might have been gone.
You know what also
by the
is
end
a
of
risk?
playoffs.
You know what's a risk? Trading for Mikko Rantanen when you're in a cup window and you see that out. You don't trade him again after 10 games.
Ridiculous.
Cowards, Carolina. Cowards.
Jack, if you're out there, for whatever reason, you're somehow watching this, if you see any texts coming from Mikko Rantanen, you leave that thing unread because he wants that watch back.
No, he's not getting it.
Just made $96 million. Make him buy you another one.